fireball reaching hundreds of feet high, the reality of military activity that took place on Kahoolawe for decades. Now, even though the bombing stopped years ago, Kahoolawe is still too dangerous to host any permanent residents. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the United States declared martial law over Kahoolawe, and that sacred island was then transformed into a bombing range. Troops prepared for multiple wars, including World War II, the Korean and Vietnam Wars, and Desert Storm. After the island was bombed, this is what it looked like. You could see shell casings on the ground, bomb fragments scattered across the island.
We had to save that island.
I have never seen such destruction of land before, and just waste and bombs all over the place, and all the bays around Kahoolawe was just darkened with red mud, and it's just kind of like our land is too valuable to kind of suffer from degradation provided by the Navy.
In 1976, Walter Reedy and Dr. Emmett Aluli, among other members of the Protect Kahoolawe Ohana, began a series of occupations on the island, risking being arrested or killed as they tried to stop the bombing. Two men, George Helm and Kimo Mitchell, were lost at sea while returning from a trip to Kahoolawe. It was not only the cries for help from the Hawaiian people that drove them back to the island, but the cries from the land and kupuna as well.
It's because our kupuna knew, and they directed us from the very beginning, that we had to do it properly. We had to ask the spirits of the land there to welcome us.
It was some kind of an experience. But then when I was looking at this rock, and the helicopter went straight up, and I was just fixed on that rock. And then the rock became the whole island. I kind of lost it. I mean, I couldn't remember too much, but I knew the island was going to die. It changed my whole life from that day.
The Protect Kahoolawe Ohana rallied with the community. They did everything they could to have their voices heard. Some traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with the president, while hundreds of others wrote to local politicians and met with the local media. Meanwhile, Walter Reedy and Richard Sawyer would stay on the island for the longest occupation, 35 days.
We had to eat coconuts on the beach and pound eels with the rock to kill the eels and eat eels, and we even had to start eating baby goats and stuff just to survive.
Platoons of military personnel were sent out to search for the two, each time finding no sign of them.
Richard and I had to duck for cover. I mean, we ducked into a crevice. Our wives would keep telling them, they're on the island, they're on the island. And our senators gave the okay that, okay, all clear, start bombing. So we could have been blown up.
The Protect Kahoolawe Ohana sued the Navy and won. A few years later, the bombing was ordered to stop, and Kahoolawe was returned back to the state.
Our story was about Aloha Aina. So Aloha Aina defeated the United States military.
We reached out to the Navy and they gave us this statement, quote, "In 1993, the Navy was directed by Congress and the President to, among other things, convey Kahoolawe to the state of Hawaii, which then delegated responsibility for the island to the Kahoolawe Island Reserve Commission. The Navy completed its requirements in accordance with Title X, which was very specific in the cleanup of Kahoolawe." Tomorrow, we'll take a look at Sailor's Hat, the giant crater that was left behind by the bombing. Some say it's a lasting symbol of the abuse inflicted on the island, but we'll tell you how it was now become home to some special creatures on Kahoolawe as the island continues to heal. It was very emotional. A lot of the interviews we did, you saw some crying. I would even get choked up at times, but just chicken skin, I think, would be, again, the only way to explain it. I mean, these people were so passionate. You heard Dr. Aluli and Walter Reedy, and just, I had to ask them, what drove them to the island? I mean, you could have been bombed. Each time they got arrested, had to go to Halawa, to prison, and they kept going back, and they said the island was calling them, and they were just gonna do what they were going to do.
Yeah, and we all knew about the damage that was done, but to see the munitions right there on the ground still all these years after, were you surprised by what you saw?
Oh, I was shocked. So there's about 25% of the island that still isn't even cleared. And they noted that everything that fell in the ocean hasn't even been touched. So, and even areas that were cleared to about 4 feet with the erosion, that could now be down to 1 feet or a foot, you know? So it's still hazardous, but just these volunteers, it's amazing to see their passion for the island. And despite all those hazards, they still want to go and help it.
And their story of survival
Yeah.
to be able to go through that and be that dedicated, it's pretty amazing.
35 days, and he was explaining to me how they heard the bombs over their heads, and they just, their passion, again, for the island was just stronger than anything else.
Kept them
And
going.
your passion as well. So part 3 is coming up tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
We look forward to that. All right, thanks, Lacey. We'll be right back.